who are investors, angel investors, and experts in their fields. So if you're building something or have curiosity about a certain industry, Capital Factories is the network you want to get into. That being said, a little house rules: bathrooms down the hallway, left, right, men, women. Look around. We have to keep this space clean in order to keep it, free for us. If you find some trash or anything on the floor on your way out, just pick it up, toss it out. Help me out. And just at the end, if we can just stack our chairs on these little chair stackers, that'd be great. Get us out of here faster. And keep us in good standing with the staff. I've been running this meetup for quite a while. I've been doing consultancy called Web Fountain for a while as well. And so I kind of help sponsor it, the meetup. My consultancy, we focus on kind of data API management. If you don't know what that is, think about it as developers, you interact with APIs all the time, Postman APIs, right, or any API client. And we integrate with API clients with database clients. So database clients are pgadmin, datagrip, right, all that stuff in code. So if you need help with that, and it's kind of specialized in Next, Node, and Postgres and Kubernetes. Good stuff. That's shout out to that. So if you need help, if your company needs help, or you need some kind of like advice or anything, let me know. I can help with that. So this is the React ATX. Parking validation, please, if you did park downstairs, looking at you, don't forget these tickets. You get a discount ticket, right? So make sure you get that before we leave this space. Sponsors and speakers, always looking for anyone who wants to speak, wants to sponsor us. That'd be great. Multiple ways to reach out to me, Twitter or X. I gotta change that. X, Twitter, whatever. Meetup.com, and React ATX is a webpage. There's a form there you can fill out to get in contact. Anyways, if you want to give a speak, please. There's no limitations. There's no rules and regulations, right? It's what you think is relevant. What do you want to work on? I know there's a hot take right now in AI. If you want to give a talk on how to integrate a React app with AI, how do you integrate that with OpenAI, Claude, or model out there? That'd be great. Obviously, state management, it's always been a pain, and always a moving target, especially now with all these frameworks flying around. Anyways, a lot of topics. If you're interested, let me know. If you want to work on something together, let me know. I got time. Happy hour. We have a happy hour after the event. We just walk downstairs to the bar. First round's on the meetup. So please come down, continue the conversation, continue networking. It's fun stuff. All right, so any questions before we get into the presentations? I know we're running a little bit late, but apologies. Yes?
Everybody here, there was a Discord for this group?
I do have a Discord with that. I have a Discord. I don't advertise it. I think it's this one. Yeah, so historically I've done Slack, but I guess they changed their free tier plan, so after 30 days everything gets wiped out. And then I moved over to Discord, and then I just didn't tell anybody. Here you go, right? I think there's a person there, or I don't know. Anyways, yeah, if you guys are really interested in it, I'll publish it and be like, hey, come on board. I know there's speaking of Discord and communities, there is a massive React community called Reactiflux. Anyone familiar with this one? No? This is probably one of the better ones. These guys are really on top of things. And here you can ask a question and get an answer almost immediately, which is pretty incredible. And they do pretty much everything with React, right? So Reactiflux is a great one. So you got options. Cool. Thank you for that. Any other questions, comments? All right, so we're going to talk about some CSS processors with Mario. Come on down, man. A round of applause. You need-
Testing any. Can you guys hear me? Hello? No. Okay, got it. Can you hear me? Hello? No. Oh, the screen was working, but now it's... Yeah, the screen isn't turned on. I don't know. Okay, there we go. All right, I can just use this one. Can you guys hear me? Or can you guys hear me? Okay. Testing and we good? Okay. Okay. Hey, everybody! Thank you for coming to React ATX today. Really appreciate it. My name is Mario Jimenez, and I'm going to give a presentation about CSS preprocessors. It's a really short guide just to get you started. So what the presentation is about is like brief introduction to preprocessors, some of the really unique features that it has, examples of some common CSS preprocessors, how to integrate preprocessor to your project. That's a really short, small live demo, and just letting you know it's not like extremely all-inclusive guide. It's just like an introduction just to get you started, right? Okay, a little bit about me. Was former software developer at a startup, currently pursuing a master's in computer science. I volunteer for React Public Library, just I'm building software for them. I built some software as a service tools and online businesses, and sometimes I blog. So that's a little bit about me. If you do want to see any past presentations, I have them in my portfolio website. If you miss it, anything that happened here, you want to see the past ones, you can go to that part. You can just go to that website, okay? So brief introduction to CSS processors. It's just a tool that just makes your CSS code more efficient, more organized. It just makes it really, really easy to maintain. It works with any type of JavaScript framework. It doesn't have to be React. It does have React available, but you can use it for just anyone. If you want to use it for Vue, for Angular, or maybe for something that's not even JavaScript related, you can put that. And it's also one of the arguably better tools that you can use to organize your code for like large and enterprise projects. So basically, to boil everything down, it's just a preprocessor is just adding some JavaScript to your CSS. It's just adding some of the tools that are already in JavaScript to CSS. If you already know really a lot about JavaScript, it'll be really easy for you. So it does have some really unique syntaxes, which is the real reason I like them. It has nesting selectors, inheritance selectors, mixin, variables, modularity, and it also has loops and if-else statements. That you probably didn't know that, but an option that's available. I'm just going to go with a few brief keywords. I'm not going to be every single thing, so just a few things to get you started. Do you need some time to like write that down, or you good? Everyone good? Okay, so one feature that CSS preprocessors have is variables. So it's used to store values that can be reused in the entire CSS library. It's very useful for projects in the design system. It keeps everything organized. So just imagine it's just JavaScript and you have a global variable and this is just defined and it works everywhere. So it's pretty much the same thing. So we have here a main app color and it's going to be this. And you can just, instead of putting like the same code, like the same hex code here, you can just put the global variable, whatever you want to name it, and then put it in any section of the CSS. So it just makes you code like a lot quicker and just makes you ship code like a lot easier. So another feature is syntax that software and preprocessors is mixins. It allows you to regenerate useful, like reusable code blocks. It can be included in it can be included in other sections of the style sheet. It's just similar to variables that basically you just define a mixin, whatever you want to make it. You want to make a checkout button that just looks like this, looks like that, and so on. Then you can just put it, maybe it looks, if you want that checkout button to be, it looks small this way, it looks big this way. It's just like, everything is repeated in this CSS project. You don't have to rewrite code and code. So it basically just the same method as dry, just don't repeat yourself. So you just make it like once and it just works anywhere. Okay, next thing selector is just allows you to, just in layman's terms, it allows you to group the HTML selectors together. So basically, instead of you writing section, H1 section, and so on, you can just put section, and inside that you put in like, this is how I want it to look with the H1. This is how I want it to look with a paragraph. This is, and so on. So again, just like keep everything smaller, organized, and just reusable. You don't have to write a lot of code. It's just easier for you. And the other feature that CSS preprocessors have is modularity. It just allows you to organize everything into just small, reusable modules. So again, it's just, you just make something and then you can just like refer it in another section of your component or anything else, and then you can just use it. So it's just a little easier. Okay. So for CSS preprocessors, you actually have a lot of options to choose from. So you have less SAS, which is the most popular one and the most frequently used. You also have stylus, post CSS, auto prefixer, stylable, and stylist. So if you have some issues with one CSS processor, you can just use another CSS processor, and you can just like take your pick and whatever works best for your project or your like company. How to integrate it to website is just add a compiler to the web server, or just you can also just install it to your React project, just npm install whatever you want, and then it just does most of the work for you. It's not really extremely difficult. So okay, so there are a few pitfalls that it has. Basically, since if you have a really small project, it's just recommended that you maybe be a little careful with it. Because you can just like balloon up to like 200 or maybe 1,000 lines of code. So that's one thing. And the other thing is that it does have a learning curve to it. It's adding JavaScript to CSS. So it's gonna, if you're not used to that, it's gonna take a little bit to just get everything ready and working. Okay. So I have a few live demos that I'm just gonna show. This is not extremely robust, but it's something that you can just look in and try on your own. Basically, you can see right here, this is a CodePen example that basically you can see right here. Is anyone having issues seeing the code, or do you need to zoom it for me to zoom it? Okay, give me one moment. Does it look good now? Yeah. Okay, got it. So as you can see, and the one good thing about CodePen is that it does actually have a preprocessor options available that you can just like make as many like CodePens as you want, and you can just use this as a sandbox to learn. So as you can see, we have background color, darken color, everything's just set up already. And instead of like you rewriting the hex code here and here and there, it just for body you can see that it's already defined the variables, so you don't have to like rewrite it over and over again. It's already done for you. And it's the same thing here for other things that are in the CSS code, like color functions. If you want the colors, the buttons to look like this or like that. So, and I'll go ahead and when I'm done with the presentation, I'll just leave it. Now I'll tell Roberto to leave a link so you can just look at the code pen and just play around with it. So as you can see, like the result of everything, instead of you having to rewrite the code, everything is defined. So darken function looks that way, darken function, lighten function looks that, desaturation and so on. So let's say I want to change the color to anything, like see, it just changes it on its own, like the entire project. You don't have to like rework anything, so it's a lot easier. And there's another website that I want to show that basically just shows a preprocessor in action. So basically, as you can see, it's already defined a variable. Like this is the color, just the base color. And if I wanted to change it to anything, it'll change it on its own. So you can just imagine that this would be like one of your projects. Like you just change one hex code inside this variable, and it just changes it everywhere. You don't have to like keep rewriting everything. Okay. So that was some examples. So that would be it. The conclusion is just that CSS can make your styling for your project a lot professional looking. At least the architecture can make it just everything more organized and more efficient. It's recommended to use this for large projects instead of small ones. It can easily just like balloon up, so the code depth can get worse and worse. So, and it takes some time to learn, and so the best recommendation is just use it in moderation. If it's the first time you're using it, just do it like little by little, and don't just do a lot of like crazy things, because it can just like mess up your code real bad. Okay, so that's most of the presentation. You can reach out to me in any of these URLs. I'm gonna send it to Roberto if anyone wants to like reach out or talk to me about anything. And the references for the project are gonna be there, so you can just read it into everything, and just if you're really interested, you can read more and more about it, and just also try out everything on your own. And for the last references, here's like every single CSS preprocessor. So if you can go to the presentation, you can try anything out, and just use the best thing that works for you, and hope for the best. Okay. So that's my presentation. And does anybody have any questions? I'll just do my best to answer.
If you were starting a project today, would you use one of these, or would you use something like Tailwind?
Depends. What is the scope of the project? What are we trying to do? Something like for a big company, for a startup, or for like maybe. Yeah, I would probably. You can use Tailwind and CSS preprocessors. So I would probably not right away, but let's see how I can integrate this, just so like the code can be just a lot more efficient, and we can just cut down like the bandwidth. Just because especially in a startup, we just keep moving and keep working. We can't really waste any time. We don't have a lot of money if we keep wasting it. So that's my mentality. Anybody else? Yeah. It would be Sass and less. I just like the syntax a little better, and it's been around longer, so I just like using it more. And, anyway, yeah.
So how would that compare with the CSS has variables in it as well, right? You don't need a preprocessor for variables.
What was that? Can you repeat that?
CSS itself, language or
Mhm.
rules already incorporate variables, right? Some properties, some variables.
Yes, I know that CSS, it already includes variables because of the new update. This just depends on what you're trying to, if your preference, you can use regular CSS variables that are in, or if you want to integrate preprocessors that has a little bit more JavaScript added to it, then it just depends on what you want. So that's my mentality.
So CSS variables, like, you have to use one that's still in your style sheet.
mhm.
I think the SAS variables have like some advantage because there's actually processing happening.
Unfortunately, I don't really know a lot about that, so I'm gonna give you a presentation. I don't know a lot too much, so yeah.
Yeah, I don't know how to read it, I'm just curious. Yeah, so if you use CSS by itself and those variables, and you use something like post CSS, it will strip out. As you build it, it will strip out. But if you use it by itself without a processor, then, well, nothing's going to take it out.
Yeah.
I guess this is sorry, so let me move on to that for a second. I guess you can at least validate that all of your variables are provided for you with a preprocessor versus CSS variables. It'll just default to what will the CSS variable do if it's not defined? Will we get any like notifications about
No,
that?
because it still work, right? It's very
Just
forgiving.
call
Yeah.
through to
It's very forgiving.
It's also not going to cause a memory leak.
Yeah, no,
If you define a CSS variable, do not.
it could be the incorrect design and you don't remember it.
Yes. It adds the flow, but it's not going to change
Okay.
gravity.
Does anybody else have a lot of good conversations? Anybody else? Yeah.
How does I know a lot of the features that like used to be particular to a lot of preprocessors, I guess it's meant to be a preprocessor, are coming into like frameworks like Emotion where you can use those like nested like styling things, and I don't know how that. It looks a lot like the syntax that we had for Vector
I think maybe the frameworks are just taking inspiration from it, just taking it and maybe not like reference it. That's what happens with software. You see, so people see what.
That's not sure if they're actually just reusing parts of it. Because it has a preprocessor like syntax, and I don't know what that is.
I don't. Yeah, but it's just like if it works, people are just gonna like keep copying it. Like, okay, this carousel, this code works. Okay, let's just put it. Okay, this part of this software works in this company. Let's just do it and just like make money. So that's yeah.
This is kind of maybe a shift in topics a little bit, but something like Next.js walks all of your views and statically analyzes your templates to determine what CSS you're actually using, and it will build just the style sheets that are necessary for each view to render, right? Very small subset of possible views, whether that's Tailwind or custom CSS. Do you know anything about like that generic tree shaping via like view tree walking? Essentially like the React plus preprocessor.
Not really familiar with that. I haven't used it in an Next.js project, mostly React. I'm sorry about that. Maybe somebody else can help you.
What was that question again? What was it?
So like, I know it's not just Next.js, but like many bundlers will walk all of your views and then like create bundles and minified CSS that only includes the styles referenced in your views.
So like tree shaking kind of thing, or no?
Yeah, I think the example of tree shaking was just statically looking at the CSS and saying like, okay, are there any classes, are there any variables that aren't referenced in the class definition, for instance? But this also looks at your view definition, and like, I think probably walks every Boolean gate to determine like if you have a string that gets injected, is it injected within a style
Yeah.
on your
I think so. I know. Yeah, Next.js has a couple of steps of analysis, but there's. So you're right. You can inject CSS into a style sheet multiple ways. One is through like the link, right? If you do import ... my CS file, right, into that landing page, whatever, it's going to import the file sheet where you're pointing to. That's what you use like export definition. So like when you import the class name, if you want to do that, or styles, right? So that only points to the style that you're looking at. So when that analysis comes through, it finds it, right? But that's global scope. Now you do it inline, right? Where you use like JavaScript, JS and CSS, or CSS and JS.
How does, silly question, how does Tailwind actually work with the inline stuff? Like, is that, because I know it's just referencing a class somewhere, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
like,
so just mapping it.
okay.
Uses post CSS.
Oh, okay.
So every like class you write gets an actual class that's created in style frame. But any like it doesn't any Tailwind class that you didn't use
is just purely looking at like the strings of the collected class names and then selecting the subset class definition from your CSS file.
Yeah.
That was a question. Just
No, yeah, you're right.
Okay.
It only matches what your classes are, right? If you don't have, if you use 1, 2, 3 classes and then you only use 1, 2, it's going to map those out, right? It's going to pull up 3.
The thing that I'm like trying to do more of is like something has to statically walk all of your views and all of their references, whether those are like using a CSS module that are being pulled in, whether it's looking at the definitions of the classes in your class name prop. And I'm just curious, like, what is that thing that maybe Next.js is using? Or generally, like, if we wanted to build with that generic tool, what is that tool?
So I don't know exactly how they're doing it, but how I would do it is use the React DOM.string and render the page, right, in the server, right? When you render the page, it's going to have the CSS necessary in that page. You analyze the thing that got rendered in the server, right? And you analyze the class names that are being pulled into that thing that you rendered, which is the JSX, right? And then from there you map it to like, hey, I render this component. This component has A, B, and C classes. Okay, I want to grab those classes from the CSS, right? So you kind of render.
How would you handle variables? Like, let's say you have class name equals, and then you have a variable definition. Like,
Yeah.
so how would you enumerate all possible values of that variable?
You don't have one with those. You don't need to actively care about that. It's already abstract control by the bundle already goes in this kind of that. So if you want to do something like SAS module export and then use that export variable as your JavaScript variable, I'm talking about the and then put it there. That's a bit another case. But specifically for SAS, because I'm working with SAS, when you do like module files, the whole idea is that it's essentially like another mini bundling process that the same way your JavaScript gets bundled, SAS gets bundled in a similar way. It just includes chunks.
And that includes that same process of looking for CSS references to include or exclude in the bundle.
Yes. Well,
So you render the SAS first, right? So now you have the real CSS that is going to be shipped to the browser, and then there's a step that matches. You're like, oh wait, I render all the CSS, but you're only using a subset of that CSS because the class name is only pointing to 5 instead of 10 things.
If we're doing this at build time, though, that's the crux of my question.
Yeah.
How do you know that it is or is not used if you're injecting a variable into the class name props value?
That variable being what? JavaScript variable or CSS?
Let's just say we have a functional React component, and in the JSX we have just a single div, and it has first prop is class name equals, and then you have brackets, and then you have a variable, and then on the line above that you do math.random, and then you're gonna do like color dash, and then.
But that's not CSS, right? That's so you render that. How is that? So before ignoring CSS, how is that component rendered by itself without? Right, it's JSX, so you need an engine to render that to HTML, right? You have to map it first to HTML.
Yeah.
So once you map it to HTML, that value is already rendered, right? There's a value to that variable, because that's what's going to get rendered in the browser.
Right. But when we're at our build time, we only have this JSX file, and then maybe a CSS module that's included that we want.
Right. So that's what I'm saying. Like, you have to render it first. That's what I'm saying. Like, if you use React _ DOM.string, whatever the backend method it is to render in the backend, I'm like most positive that's what they're doing. They're rendering how the HTML is going to look like, and then from there they analyze that. The static analyzes that. They walk that tree because it's already HTML. It's no longer JSX. It's HTML rendered. It's going to look exactly like this is in the front end, right?
So
if it's inline CSS.
Yeah, I think I kind of see where he's coming from, because if you render the HTML, that's inferring a static site. If you don't have a non-static, like a reactive page, where that variable can change at any point and
Inline
render new
CSS.
HTML. Right. That's
Right. So
where
that's
you have
that
inline
you can't static analyze that.
Right, and I think that's kind of what, if I'm not mistaken, that's kind of what you're getting at, is like how does it tree shake if you have dynamically rendered
can't.
CSS classes? Yeah. Okay.
You can't. Yeah. So there's three ways to import CSS, right? Runs in the link meta tag. One is the static, I think is it, meta tag, and the other one is inline, right?
It's regular style tag.
Style tag, yes, not static, style tag, right? And so JSS and CSS always does inline or uses a style tag at runtime or at build time.
So does, I mean, I know that Next.js does this tree shaking. It would not be able to guarantee correctness if it thought that one of the things it had shaken out of the tree, we say, could then be injected as a variable.
Yeah,
Right? Like we would either have that class missing at runtime, or we would make it so that we could never tree shake anything. So that tells me that they've somehow figured it out.
They can do like paint analysis basically, right? Like for example, like the catastrophic case, I guess what you're getting at is like if we say there's a URL parameter, that is the class name that we're going to put on the data component, right? That's like then everyone will be in it. And we can say anything that is allowed to be variable, that is going to affect, you know, every variable going forward until we get down to the class names that depend on it. And if you're affected by anything that's coming from like URL parameter or other sources of paint, then you're not allowed to shake it.
So given a node in this view tree, given a view, if it has runtime variables, you cannot tree shake. You must, its bundle must include all possible static CSS.
Well, it doesn't. It's not just any variable, right? They probably can like still shake it out if it's like if it's like a Boolean variable, you can be like, okay, yeah, that's either true or false. We'll just keep it both cases, right?
Oh, but you mean from like the context of the request?
Yeah, from like that's the like most conservative thing that you
Sure,
follow.
yeah.
It's just like look everything that is going to be illegal, and look at all the variables that are getting touched by further illegal things, and anything that ends up in a class and dependent on that is not allowed to be treated. I don't know if that's how they actually do it, or if they do something like simpler.
I would imagine that they're walking through the actual component like code. If there's actually any tree shaking going on, you have to go through like and check variables to see like where branching happens and whether or not it actually affects class type.
Are we sure it doesn't just break? Because that's what happens with Tailwind. It says like, do not use dynamic classes because it's building way before it's dynamic.
Yeah.
So it's like if you want to use dynamic, you use the style tag, or you use regular CSS. It just breaks. Like when you switch the class, it's just not there. So Next.js is probably either putting in everything, not tree shaking anything related to that variable, or it just breaks.
Yeah, I just want to say, unless you reference, like, so when you import the CSS file, you can like import like style from whatever file. You can reference classes there, like style class 1, class 2, class 3, so you can inject that, and this will be literally a string as well. But if you do just random variable, like if it doesn't match, well, that's it. It doesn't match. Like no compiler can give you like 100% guess of like there are static strings essentially in SCSS and then your math random class. Like, I cannot guarantee it will align. I will compute your math random, but that's it. If this class happens to be when HTML is rendered, you're in luck.
So then you're in the camp of very likely there is no tree shaking if you have that kind of dynamic content.
Well, unless it's directly referencing a selector from SCSS, it just includes the SCSS file. That's it. That's the point.
Yes, that makes sense.
And that's probably the rule of thumb, because like you kind of guess it. That's the point. Like, I can imagine the build time, something like, I don't know, n cubed when you try to do all of that.
Yeah.
It's like nested and nested, in-nested, because you're trying to do, no, yeah, I think no one just cares about that. Yeah. Like at the end of the day, it's your job to connect the dots. Like, if you reference the SCSS selector, you will have a CSS selector. Even if it's a dynamic variable, something like styles, square bracket, theme dark, black, else, light. Like styles dot dark will be selected, styles dot light will be selected. That's it. If you provide complete gibberish, it won't just catch it. That's the whole point. It will include your SCSS and like good luck. That's at least, I don't know in Next. Maybe they have some fancy thing, but in React that's the case.
I think I'm fairly confident like Next uses post CSS to handle this. Like I don't think it's a proprietary like Vercel thing.
Yeah, no, it's post this.
Yeah.
So that changes things because I come from an SCSS background. I work with post CSS.
get another thing too is like the JavaScript and CSS, or what was it, CSS and JavaScript, whatever it was. One of the downfalls or negative impacts was that everything's inline rendered, so that just, and it has to run the JavaScript, right? Every time, there's no caching, you can't cache your classes, you can't do any of that stuff, and so you can't really static analyze anything because everything's rendered in the browser at runtime, right? So you even try to build it, no matter what, one of the arguments against it is that your bloat, your JavaScript bloat, it's not, the browser can't parallelize the CSS because you don't have no CSS. It's everything inside the JavaScript brain. You have to process JavaScript before you get to the CSS. So in Next.js, there's always this issue, I don't know if you run into it, if you connect like a server component or something, and you connect the database and you make a query to get the data to pump into a component and then ship it. If you don't have connection to the database, your build's going to fail, right? I don't know if you've seen those errors before where you do it in npm or next build, and it's saying like, oh, you can't build these pages because the database connection is not there, right? So it stops the build. The reason it stopped that build is because we can't do a static analysis. It needs that data to go into the component and render that component to ship it to the front end. And then it also says, hey, I'm rendering a component in the server that's different in the client. Have you seen that error? Right, that's another error too. So the CSS, it might be CSS or whatever, but I'm rendering a component in the server that does not match what you're rendering in the client, and so it stops the build too, right? So I think what's happening there is Next is saying, okay, we're trying to do this static analysis to do all this crazy stuff, and we're rendering 2 times and they're not the same. And so either something is not matching with your CSS or your variables or whatever, right? You got to fix it before it renders, before it starts working. So
yeah, I've run into that when trying to just print like the performance API to the DOM and giving different values in the server and client context.
Yeah,
I think
right,
it has to
yes.
do with determinism, for sure.
Right, exactly, determinism. But they're rendering it on the server and then comparing it to what it will render in the client. And it's like, hey, wait a second, they're not the same. We're going to not do it. We can't function. We can't guarantee what Next.js is supposed to guarantee in the front end, right? So inlining CSS is not a good practice, but you need it because there's dynamism, right? There's your alerts and your whatever logic there is, but you got to remember it's going to ship with JavaScript. The JavaScript have to run to fill that the variable, right? To fill that condition. Like CSS there's nothing you can do about that, right? It could be true that data is a string, or the data is a number, or data is a Boolean. Like how is this processor going to figure that out at runtime? Right? You think about it, you can't really figure that out. What Next.js tries to do is, okay, I'm going to connect to your database, I'm going to pull the data, I'm going to render the component with the static data, if you're doing with a blog post or something, the static data. Okay, I'm going to render that in the client. Hey, look, they're both the same. Okay, we're good to go, right? But at the end of the day, on the client, that data could be a Boolean, it could be a number, it could be a string. And so if variables make your class name, there's no way how can you determine that ahead of time? If it's going to be my class, 1, 2, 3, my class, true, false, my class, some other string, like my class and my string.
So you're saying that, I want to keep this short because I've
Yeah.
definitely taken the mic way too long, but you're essentially saying that like Next can say, this is a static site, make sure that the prerequisite for pre-rendering is available at build time. Or it says, hey, I think this is probably a dynamic site, whether that's use client or whether it sees you looking at a search param within the I guess it's the route file, is that right? Either way, it's able to determine like, hey, this is probably not a thing that we can statically determine the CSS files or the CSS
Beforehand.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
But remember, that file that has those variables is going to import the CSS on top if you're doing CSS modules, right? Or if you're using some style sheet components, right? It will use that module or that library's package to process, right? So Next.js, you don't need to use post CSS, right? You can use Tailwind, you can use any of these other Sass, right? And so now Next.js hands off that pre-processing to that to that engine, right? But if you stick with post CSS, which Next.js, really builds up on top, you can take those little steps further, right? So that's another thing you guys think about is if your style components if that's your CSS go-to, then everything you have to make sure that that library is the part to parse that the syntax, right? Because it all comes down to the library's ability to parse that syntax. And I don't think Next.js has built-in parsers for all types of CSS, right? Because you can just use the style components or whatever CSS embeds or whatever flavor of the month CSS is coming out, right? But if you do stick with CSS modules, then oh man, you got a lot of free stuff.
Cool.
Maybe I'm right, maybe I'm wrong.
We blame you.
Nah, that's fine. No, that's good. Just everyone just entering discussion, just like discussing like what's the best and worst option. That's good. Does anyone else have any questions? Anyone curious about anything? Okay. If that's everything, then yeah, thank you for your time. I hope you appreciate it. I'll talk to Roberto for presentation. Okay. Thanks, everyone. Yeah, no worries.
So come on down to the bar and let's continue the conversation. Just look around, pick up some trash. If you do need the parking tickets, I'm sorry? Oh yeah, you can stack the chairs right there in the corner. It'll be great. Thank you. Parking tickets. Parking tickets.
Not for you. I thought you waved in front of me.